January 2018 brought two seemingly unrelated cases to New Mexico law enforcement. In Albuquerque, a missing person report was filed by a worried brother. In Rio Rancho, human remains discovered burning on a remote dirt road, bound with chains and tortured before death. What investigators didn't initially realize was that these cases would merge into one of the most disturbing family murders in state history. The missing woman was 69-year-old Marilyn Gandert, a quiet widow who lived alone after losing her family to tragedy. The burned remains would soon be identified as the same person through dental records. The connection between these two crime scenes would expose a web of family dysfunction, financial desperation, and calculated violence that shocked even experienced detectives. 3 people close to Marilyn had orchestrated her murder with chilling precision. Hit like, subscribe for weekly true crime content, and share this story to honor Marilyn's memory. On January 28, 2018, at 6:56 in the morning, Harry Gandert made a phone call that would change everything. His voice carried deep concern as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher about his sister Marilyn, who had seemingly vanished without explanation. Marilyn Gandert lived a quiet life in Albuquerque, New Mexico. After losing her husband and her son Ryan to suicide in 2014, she had become increasingly solitary, finding comfort in routine and the companionship of her beloved dog. Her days were predictable, her habits consistent. Harry's worry stemmed from several alarming signs that painted a disturbing picture. Marilyn's phone had been turned off for several days, which was completely unlike her. Her car remained parked in its usual spot at home, untouched. Most concerning of all, a note Harry had left at her door the previous day remained sealed and unopened. When police arrived at Marilyn's residence, they discovered troubling evidence of an abrupt departure. Her house keys were hanging from the front doorknob, and the backsliding door had been left wide open. These details immediately raised red flags for the responding officers. Nancy Robinson, Marilyn's best friend and former colleague from the post office, provided crucial context about the missing woman's character. She emphasized that this behavior was completely out of character for Marilyn, who never missed phone calls and would never abandon her dog under any circumstances. As the investigation expanded, police turned their attention to Marilyn's rental property nearby. This property had been home to Alyssa Bickett, Marilyn's daughter-in-law, along with her family. When officers arrived at the rental property, they found Alyssa, her son Drake, and her friend Annie Rail in the process of moving out. The timing seemed suspicious, and their explanations about the move raised additional questions. Officers discovered that Alyssa and her family were in the process of moving out of Marilyn's rental property, but something about their explanation didn't add up, leading police to dig deeper into their relationship with the missing woman. 2 days earlier, on January 26, 2018, a woman was driving home from work through the rural outskirts of Rio Rancho, New Mexico, when something caught her attention. Along a quiet dirt road, she noticed a dark pile that appeared to be burning. The sight was unusual enough to register in her memory, but she continued on her way home. The next morning, January 27th, curiosity compelled her to return to the location with her husband. What they discovered would haunt them forever. At 11:42 in the morning, they placed an urgent call to 911, their voices shaking as they reported what appeared to be human remains. The caller's description painted a horrific scene. A body had been burned on what appeared to be a mattress, leaving visible bones, internal organs, and recognizable human features like lips and teeth. The condition of the remains suggested this wasn't a natural death or accident. When Rio Rancho deputies arrived at the remote location, they confirmed the caller's worst fears. The scene before them was indeed human remains in a grotesque state of decomposition and burning. The victim appeared to be small in stature, possibly a child or teenager based on the size of the bones. Most disturbing were the metal chains that had been twisted tightly around the victim's wrists and legs, suggesting restraint and torture before death. The right foot had been severed cleanly from the body, and the victim's mouth was frozen in what appeared to be a silent scream. The positioning and condition of the remains suggested this wasn't simply a disposal site. The body had been placed deliberately, almost as if meant to be discovered. It seemed to carry a message of violence and intimidation. Following standard homicide investigation protocol, police immediately secured the scene and began photographing everyone present, including the couple who made the discovery and all responding officers. The area was cordoned off as a crime scene while investigators began processing evidence. News of the gruesome discovery spread quickly through the community, prompting numerous tips from people reporting missing friends and family members. Among these concerned citizens was Nancy Robinson, who contacted authorities with growing suspicion that the burned remains might belong to her missing friend, Marilyn Gandert. Acting on this tip, police quickly obtained Marilyn's dental records and expedited their delivery to the medical examiner's office for comparison analysis. The dental records confirm the burned remains are indeed Marilyn Gandert, transforming a missing person case into a brutal homicide investigation, and police must now return to deliver the devastating news to Harry, while the search for her killers begins in earnest. The drive to Harry Gandert's home was one of the most difficult tasks facing the investigating officers. They carried with them the devastating confirmation that would shatter a brother's hopes and transform grief into something far more complex. When officers arrived at Harry's door, his face immediately revealed that he understood the gravity of their visit. The dental records had provided conclusive evidence that the burned remains discovered in Rio Rancho belonged to his sister Marilyn. The missing person case had become a homicide investigation. Harry's emotional breakdown was immediate and heartbreaking. Through his tears, he described Marilyn as a wonderful person who would do anything for others, someone who had already endured more tragedy than anyone should have to bear. The loss of her husband and son Ryan to suicide in 2014 had been devastating, but she had persevered with quiet dignity. As investigators gathered more information about Marilyn's final days, a troubling picture began to emerge of family relationships that had deteriorated beyond repair. Harry revealed that Marilyn had been going through the difficult process of evicting her daughter-in-law Alyssa Bickett from the rental property due to consistent non-payment of rent and broken promises. The relationship between Marilyn and Alyssa had been complicated from the beginning, but it had become particularly strained since Ryan's death in 2014. Initially, Marilyn had shown remarkable generosity toward her daughter-in-law, offering support and housing during a difficult period. However, that goodwill had been systematically eroded over time. Marilyn, typically a generous and forgiving person, had grown increasingly tired of the lies and financial stress that Alyssa's presence brought to her life. The decision to pursue legal eviction hadn't been made lightly, but it represented Marilyn's final attempt to protect herself from further exploitation. This wasn't a typical landlord-tenant relationship that had gone wrong. This was a family situation where trust had been completely destroyed, where generosity had been met with deception, and where legal action had become the only remaining option. Nancy Robinson provided additional context about Marilyn's growing frustrations with Alyssa's behavior and her difficult decision to finally take legal action to remove her from the property. As investigators focus on Alyssa as their primary suspect, they discover she had been deliberately concealing the truth about her eviction, raising questions about what else she might be hiding, and whether her calm demeanor during their first encounter was actually calculated deception. With mounting suspicions about the family's involvement in Marilyn's disappearance and death, investigators returned to conduct more thorough interviews with Alyssa Bickett, her son Drake, and their friend Annie Rail. What emerged was a pattern of contradictory statements and suspicious behavior that deepened police concerns. Alyssa's timeline of events simply didn't align with the established facts about when Marilyn was last seen alive. She maintained that she had seen Marilyn on Saturday morning to collect keys and had returned them on Sunday. But investigators already knew that Marilyn had been killed before Sunday arrived. This fundamental inconsistency immediately raised red flags about Alyssa's credibility. Drake's behavior during questioning became increasingly concerning to the experienced detectives. His responses displayed an unusual level of calmness and emotional detachment when discussing his missing grandmother. Most people would show natural signs of worry, confusion, or distress when a loved one vanishes under mysterious circumstances. When officers informed Drake about his grandmother's death, his reaction was particularly telling. Instead of the shock, grief, or surprise that would be expected from a family member receiving such devastating news, Drake's response seemed rehearsed and lacking in genuine emotion. This unnatural composure suggested either psychological detachment or calculated deception. Annie Rail's account introduced additional complications to the investigation. She described tensions during the moving process and detailed Marilyn's confrontational behavior regarding the eviction proceedings. While her story contained specific details that seemed authentic, certain elements didn't align with the accounts provided by Alyssa and Drake. Each suspect's narrative contained enough truthful elements to appear plausible on the surface, but careful analysis revealed significant inconsistencies that couldn't be explained by simple miscommunication or memory lapses. The contradictions appeared deliberate, suggesting coordinated efforts to mislead investigators. Recognizing the potential for evidence destruction, police moved quickly to obtain a search warrant for the rental property. Their concern was that if Alyssa retained access to the house, crucial physical evidence might be eliminated before it could be properly documented and analyzed. The search of the rental property yielded a critical discovery that transformed suspicions into concrete evidence. Investigators found a small but significant drop of blood on the wall inside the front door. This physical evidence confirmed that violence had occurred within the house, elevating the location from a potential crime scene to a confirmed site of criminal activity. Understanding they were dealing with multiple suspects who might be coordinating their stories and potentially destroying evidence, investigators placed all three individuals under surveillance while building their case for formal arrests. Police arrest all three suspects, Alyssa, Drake, and Annie, bringing them in for formal interrogation, where the shocking truth about Marilyn's final moments will finally be revealed through conflicting confessions that expose the calculated brutality of her murder. In separate interrogation rooms across the police station, three suspects sat facing detectives, each about to provide dramatically different versions of the same horrific crime. Their conflicting accounts would reveal the shocking truth about Marilyn Gandert's final moments and expose the calculated brutality that had cost her life. Drake Gandert made perhaps the most disturbing initial claim to investigators. He told detectives that his grandmother had repeatedly approached him with requests to end her life, claiming she would say, "I'm too old. Will you please kill me?" Drake attempted to frame the murder as a form of assisted suicide, suggesting that he had merely fulfilled his grandmother's wishes. However, his continued emotional detachment and unnatural calmness during this explanation only served to further disturb the experienced investigators who recognized the signs of deception. Alyssa Bickett's confession painted a more complex picture of premeditated violence driven primarily by anger over the eviction proceedings. She admitted to attacking Marilyn during what she described as a heated confrontation, but attempted to minimize her own role while shifting primary blame to Annie Rail for the actual killing. According to Alyssa's version, she had left the room during the attack and returned to find Annie wiping blood from a knife, suggesting the fatal wounds had been inflicted by someone else. Annie Rail's testimony, however, provided the most detailed and disturbing account of what had actually transpired inside that rental house. Her confession revealed that this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, but rather a coordinated attack that had been planned in advance. Annie described Alyssa as the primary orchestrator who had given clear signals for the attack to begin at the predetermined moment. According to Annie's detailed account, when Marilyn arrived at the house that day, Alyssa provided a subtle nod to both Annie and Drake, serving as the signal to initiate their brutal assault. Annie described how she tackled Marilyn from behind while Drake simultaneously approached from the front, trapping the victim between her attackers with no possibility of escape. The attack that followed was horrifically violent and prolonged. Annie described attempts to strangle Marilyn with various cords, followed by multiple stab wounds inflicted by different weapons. Drake's participation wasn't passive or reluctant as he had initially suggested. Instead, he was an active participant in the violence against his own grandmother. Following the murder, the three perpetrators faced the challenge of disposing of Marilyn's body. Annie's confession revealed that Drake's girlfriend, Nikki, had been forced at gunpoint to assist in the disposal process. Nikki was compelled to drive Annie's truck to the remote location in Rio Rancho, where Marilyn's remains would be dumped. The body disposal was carried out with disturbing calculation. After transporting the remains to the isolated dirt road, the perpetrators doused Marilyn's body with gasoline before setting it on fire, hoping to destroy evidence that might lead back to them. Forensic evidence strongly corroborated these testimonies and proved the premeditated nature of this family murder. Surveillance footage captured Annie's truck near the dump site during the time frame when the body was disposed of, while DNA evidence found within the vehicle linked all three suspects directly to the crime. With overwhelming evidence against all three suspects, the case moves toward justice. But the true extent of this family's betrayal and the calculated nature of their crime against a woman who had tried to help them will be fully revealed in court. After months of meticulous investigation and evidence gathering, formal criminal charges were filed in May 2018 against all three perpetrators involved in Marilyn Gandert's brutal murder. The comprehensive case built by investigators left no doubt about the guilt of those responsible for this family tragedy. Alyssa Bickett and her son Drake Gandert were both charged with second-degree murder, reflecting the premeditated and calculated nature of their attack on Marilyn. Annie Rail faced similar serious charges for her direct participation in the violent assault and subsequent cover-up efforts. Annie's strategic decision to cooperate with prosecutors and testify against her co-conspirators provided crucial testimony that confirmed the premeditated nature of the attack. Her detailed account helped establish the timeline of events and demonstrated how the three defendants had worked together to plan and execute Marilyn's murder. On October 3, 2019, justice was finally served when the presiding judge handed down sentences that reflected the calculated brutality and betrayal inherent in this crime. Alyssa Bickett, identified as the primary orchestrator of the murder plot, received a sentence of 30 years in prison. Her son Drake was sentenced to 26 years behind bars for his active participation in killing his own grandmother. Annie Rail received a 12-year sentence, with the reduced term reflecting her cooperation with prosecutors and her testimony that helped secure convictions against the other defendants. During sentencing, the court acknowledged Drake's troubled background and the challenging circumstances of his upbringing, but made clear that these factors could not excuse or diminish the horrific nature of his actions against his own grandmother. The case represents more than just another criminal conviction. It exposes how desperation, addiction, and financial pressures can corrupt family relationships beyond recognition and repair. Marilyn Gandert, a woman who had shown remarkable kindness and generosity to her daughter-in-law following her son's tragic suicide, was ultimately repaid with the ultimate betrayal. Her death serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from those closest to us, and that trust, once broken, can lead to unimaginable consequences.